The phone rang while the ink was still wet. My son's voice said he'd sold my house and my land, and that tomorrow he'd drive me to a nice place. I had a stamp in my hand and a tremor in my ribs, and I pressed steel to paper and felt the world wobble and steady all at once. I'm Arthur Hale, 78 years old, my knees full of weather and my memory clear as the Blanco River after a storm. I've measured land my whole life, corners and easements, fences and creeks, the human habit of pushing a boundary by a foot and calling it an accident. I live outside Wimberley, Texas, on 40 acres that used to be nothing but scrub oak and a modest spring. I planted every cypress along the water line. That shade isn't an accident. It's intention you can sit beneath. The morning my son called, I was at a title office in San Marcos, my palms still smelling faintly like potting soil and rosemary. The receptionist kept sneaking looks at me the way people do when they think a scene might break out. My phone buzzed and I almost didn't pick up. I did. "Dad," Brandon said, all brisk syllables, as if kindness were a tax he'd already paid. "Good news. I sold the place. Packed you a bag in my head already. We're touring facilities tomorrow." I looked at the clerk, a young woman with a small tattoo of a paper crane on her wrist. "Facilities," I repeated, and the word tasted like dust. "Great community, medical staff on site, no stairs," he said. "Come on, Dad, this is overdue." I set the phone down just enough to watch my hand press the notary seal into a revocation of power of attorney, the kind you file when someone is about to play chess with your life. Metal clinked. Paper accepted it without a fuss. "Brandon," I said evenly, "you forgot something." "What would that be, old man?" His laugh was a cough dressed up as courage. "You forgot I know paper better than you know people." He didn't have words for a second. I heard city noise behind him, Austin horns, a crosswalk chirp. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, voice flat now. "You can't manage out there. I did what was best." "The best for who?" I asked without heat. The clerk, Angela, her name tag said, slid a receipt toward me. The revocation was recorded, the alert to the county clerk transmitted, the hold notice faxed to every title office in 100 miles. The trees I planted had watched me bury a wife and cradle 2 grandbabies. They'd watch me do this too. "Dad, you had a stroke last year," Brandon said, seizing the old myths. "You forget things. You wandered into the road." "I chased a rooster," I said. "He deserved it." He swore. He told me he had everything lined up, that a developer's earnest money was already in escrow, that this was going to be painless if I didn't make it hard. Then the part of him that I still loved, under the casing of pride and fear, flared mean. "You'll thank me when you're safe and not rotting in that museum." I didn't thank him. I hung up and my knuckles went white on the edge of the counter. Angela reached beneath the desk and set a paper cup of water by my elbow. I didn't want pity. Pity turns a person into an exhibit. What I wanted was justice, the kind that isn't revenge but simple alignment, north on a compass, a fence repaired straight. Outside, the hill country lay open under a January sun, crisp air, cedar scent threading the wind. I sat in the truck with the engine off and listened to the tick of cooling metal. My finger traced an old nick in the steering wheel. A memory swam up, Lena's laughter shaking the porch one summer when the peaches all came ripe on the same day. We'd eaten them over the sink, juice on our wrists, because there was nothing else to do. She's been gone 12 years now. I still talk to her when I water the seedlings, not because I'm senile, but because grief needs a place to go, and the garden takes it like compost and turns it to something I can touch. I should tell you how a life like mine happens. I grew up in Amarillo, third of 5, a mother who could stretch $1 like taffy, and a father who saved every receipt in a cigar tin. "Paper's proof when memory lies to you," he'd say, tapping the tin like a metronome. I fell into surveying because a county judge needed someone who knew trig and didn't mind walking fence rows in August. I learned the way deeds tell stories, mistakes and mischief included. Out here, if you don't respect paper, you end up owning half a creek and a lawsuit. I met Lena at a feed store in Hays County. She was buying a salt block and arguing price with the owner, and I fell in love like a rock falls, a sudden, convincing pull. We bought this land in 1983 for a number that now sounds like a typo, back when the spring was choked with debris and the house's roof leaked like a broken promise. We fixed it. We fixed everything. We raised Brandon here, good boy turned complicated man. He liked nice things. Lena liked spoiling him. I played the anvil. By the time I turned in my county badge, the place had a small nursery business attached to it. Native grasses, milkweed for monarchs, cypress starts for people who understood patience. The porch sagged in the right places. There's a kind of holy in that. So when my son told me he'd sold it, my chest went cold as creek water. But fear's a quick burning fuel. You have to move on to something cleaner. I drove back slow, wound down Fisher Store Road, watched the light lean across the pastures. At the river bend, I pulled over. The whistling that lives in the sycamores out there was going strong. I told Lena in my head, I'm going to have to be mean without being cruel. She knew what that meant. At the house, I walked room to room, looking not for what I'd lose, photos in their frames, the quilt Lena made the winter she got sick, but for what I wouldn't. The spring doesn't care about escrow. The cypress rings keep time you can't foreclose. That night, I made a list beside the coffee pot in block letters. Call county clerk, confirm record. Email every title office, notice of revocation and fraud alert. Bank, move accounts, attorney, schedule, elder law. Then I slept like a man who has wolves in the woods and a rifle leaned on the chair. You sleep and you wake with the wolves still there, but you're still you. If you're listening to this, tell me where you are. I like to imagine front porches in Phoenix, kitchen tables in Milwaukee, folks on lunch breaks in Boise. If the story sits with you, hit that little heart and stick around. I've got more of these bones to turn into words. I'll keep talking as long as you keep listening. The first time I knew a fence would mean a fight, I was 21 and carrying a steel chain tape for a foreman who called everyone Chief. We were staking a boundary off FM 1709, and a rancher came out with a shotgun in the crook of his elbow. That fence is where my granddaddy set it, he said, and I had to be the one to tell him the deed said different. You learn to talk slow in those moments. You learn that men get itchy, not over inches, but over inheritance. I learned to keep records like a miser hoards coins. I kept ledger books for work and ledger books for home. I have a binder labeled funeral because grief makes fools of us, and a checklist keeps the floor from falling away. When Lena got sick, those binders turned into a lifeline, insurance claims, specialist notes, dosages, a log of her good days like pearls on a string. After she died, the binders stayed. The point is, I've spent a lifetime practicing how to not get lost. Brandon grew up with the smell of hay and gasoline in his hair. Handsome boy, quick mind, appetite like a flame. He liked the easy power of a new pair of boots, the way people at the H-E-B checkout line softened when he smiled. I tried to train his gaze toward the slow fortunes, good tools, honest pride, how a root ball feels when it's ready. He had other tutors. Austin does that to a kid. It sells them speed and calls it a virtue. He went to UT Law like a rocket with his own smoke. Lena and I drove him down on move-in day, the truck bed stacked with quilts and a used bookshelf and a skillet her mother had seasoned for 3 generations. He kissed his mother's temple and promised to call. He kept his promise sometimes. His wife, Marissa, came from Dallas with a starched laugh and no time for mud. She was fine to me, always yes sir and thank you, but her eyes dimmed on our porch like someone turned down a lamp. They had 2 kids who liked me well enough in the way city kids like a novelty. Caleb, who asked 1,000 questions, and Nora, who didn't speak until you'd earned it. I noticed the shift when I started getting weekly calls timed to the evening news. How's your blood pressure, Dad? Still getting up on the ladder? Ever think about putting together an estate plan? The lawyer bled through the sun. I told him I had a plan, and I did. Clear will, executor named, land held in a trust with triggers that required my signature, and failing that, a doctor's certification of incapacity. I'd written it for the world, not for my boy. But the world has a way of squeezing where you don't expect. He brought a friend to the ranch one Sunday, a real estate agent with a handshake like a damp napkin who walked the property with his camera out and said, "Imagine a lot." Imagine cabins. Imagine a tasting room. Imagine an event space that rents for $8,000 a weekend. I imagined a line of cars where the monarchs rest. I imagined my own ghost rattling the fence at night in protest. After they left, I sat on the back steps with the pruners in my lap and waited for a feeling to tell me what to do. The cicadas were in full voice. The stars came on like a switch flipped. I kept seeing Lena at the feed store that day, the grit on her cheek, the easy boss in her shoulders. You can love someone, she used to say, and still keep your keys in your pocket. The following Thursday, I drove into the Hayes County Clerk's office to see if any documents had been recorded under my name. The clerk running the index was a man my age named Daryl who loves the Cowboys like oxygen. "What you looking for, Art?" he asked. "Trouble signed with my hand that wasn't my hand," I said. He turned the screen toward me, and there it was, a durable power of attorney, notarized in Travis County, giving Brandon the authority to manage real property and financial assets. It had my name in a font that felt like a stranger. The signature looked like a copy of me that got left in the sun. I didn't say a word for a long time. Then I said, "Print me that." Daryl didn't say sorry, which I appreciated. He said, "We can put a flag on your index, Art. You get anything, we call." I took the paper to my kitchen table and did what my father taught me. I went line by line with a pencil and wrote the questions into the margins. Who notarized? Where? What day? Where was I that day? What human beings helped this happen? I found the notary's stamp, and then I called a woman I knew from church who works for a civil attorney in San Marcos and said, "I need to talk to someone who knows elder law like the back of their hand." That's how I met Sandra Buck. Gray braid, plaid shirt, handshake like a square knot. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she said, "Let's get your ducks not only in a row but in a marching band." We drafted a revocation of all powers. We recorded it. We put every title company in Central Texas on notice that any transaction touching my land required my wet signature in person. She told me to get a cognitive evaluation from a neutral doctor. "Guardianship plays fast and mean in this state," she said. "Don't leave a door cracked." I made the appointment at Del Seaton. I did the memory tests, drew clocks, copied shapes, remembered lists. I aced them like a kid chasing a sticker. I walked out with a letter on letterhead that said my name and the word intact in the places that matter. I slept that night with the letter under my pillow like a child doing magic. Brandon came out again, this time in a suit that didn't belong near cedar pollen. He stood on my porch like a salesman and tried a new script. Less force, more silk. "Dad, I know we got crossways on the phone," he said. "I'm just trying to help. Marissa worries. The kids, you know. What if something happens and no one's here?" "I got neighbors," I said. "I've got a gate I can lock and a shotgun I don't advertise." He laughed in a way that said he didn't think I was joking. "Come into town for a week," he said. "Try it on. There's a place near Zilker. Walkable cafes, a garden out back. It's not a prison." "Bran," I said, using the name from when his knees were always dirty. "Who's the developer?" He paused just a beat too long. "A group out of Houston," he said. "They do conservation-minded projects." "What's the price?" He told me a number that might have been fair in 2001. The anger that came had a calm to it, like cold air slipping under a door. "And the earnest money?" I asked. "Standard." "How much is standard when you're selling your father's life to a group out of Houston?" The smile cracked. "Dad," he snapped, "I have authority. It's legal." "It's fake," I said, and I watched his pupils thin. I can taste a forgery the way my tongue finds a chipped tooth. "You got a notary to play along. You'll see them from the wrong side of a courtroom." He took a step back like I'd slapped him. "You're not thinking clearly." "I've never thought clearer." He left with the porch board still vibrating. I sat in my chair, and the chair remembered my weight. The dogs under the step blew out their breath in a way that said the weather would hold. By noon, my phone rattled with numbers I didn't know. A title closer in New Braunfels thanking me for the heads up. A developer's assistant politely asking for clarification. Then a private number breathing. I hung up. After lunch, I drove to my bank, moved what I could to a new institution across town, added two-factor like a man setting extra traps. I called Adult Protective Services the way a person files a weather report. Just the facts. Elder financial exploitation. Attempted unauthorized sale using a fraudulent POA. The woman on the line sounded like a schoolteacher from somewhere flat. "We'll open a case," she said. "Someone will call you." They did. A man named Curtis with a voice like a cedar trunk. He came out in a state car that looked tired of gravel roads. He took notes under my oak tree while the wind tried to turn his pages. "Most folks don't call until they're already cleaned out," he said. "You did this early. That's good." "This isn't the part where I boast," I said, and he smiled to show me he understood. That night I dreamed of Lena at the sink with peach juice on her wrists and woke up with a kind of iron in my mouth. The list by the coffee pot had new bullets. Trail every email, make a paper bag for every conversation, keep the tone even, never cuss first. I added one. Call Marissa. It felt like poking a bruise, but it seemed right. I left a voicemail. She didn't call back. 3 days later, Brandon's last card hit the table. He arrived unannounced with 2 people in tow, a psychiatrist with tidy hair and a woman with a tote bag and a badge clipped to her cardigan. "Dad," he said, all composure. "This is Dr. Chen and Ms. Phillips from Social Services. We're going to make sure you're safe." I looked past them, into the oak shade where the swing Lena hung still moved a little with the breeze. I said, "Great, come in. But first, I want to show you something." I set a folder on the kitchen table. Dr. Chen put the end of his glasses in his mouth and read. It took longer than Brandon liked. Ms. Phillips read too, lips moving. When they were done, they both looked at Brandon. The look said, "You didn't tell us this existed." "This is a thorough evaluation," Dr. Chen said, "from a reputable clinic, within the last week." "I get lost sometimes," I said, "but only in the feed store when the screws are next to the rope." Brandon's ears went red. "He's been coached," he told them. "You can't trust—" A knock at the screen door interrupted him. Jesse Morales, neighbor, Hayes County deputy, off duty but wearing the stance of his work, tipped his cap to the room. "Afternoon. Got a call about a wellness checkout this way." Ms. Phillips lifted her badge. Jesse lifted his life. "We all here for the same reason?" he asked. "We're good," I said. "We were just finishing." Brandon looked at me like he didn't know my face. I thought of him at 9, crying over a dog that got snake bit, how whispered apologies roped out of him like a spool that wouldn't stop. If rage is a kind of grief, he was grieving something he hadn't named yet. He left without touching me or the table. The psychiatrist and social worker followed. Jesse lingered, eyes moving through the room like a safety check. "You call if you need me," he said. "You don't owe anyone your keys." "I heard that somewhere," I said, and I sat down very slowly as if I'd been carrying 20 pounds I hadn't admitted to. Sometimes survival looks like a man, alone, at a kitchen table, letting his hands shake until they stop. Rumors breed quicker than mold. Within a week, folks at the feed store paused conversations mid-sentence when I walked by. A man I'd measured land for in '96 clapped my shoulder and asked, careful as if approaching a skittish horse, whether I needed anything. Anything meant pity. I accepted a bag of deer corn anyway because refusal is its own kind of pride, and I was tired of carrying so much of it. Brandon sent a lawyerly email contesting the revocation as procured under duress. I printed it, wrote duress my ass in the margin, then regretted the profanity, and wrote apology to future me beside it. Sandra filed a petition for a temporary injunction, a TRO, to freeze any attempted transfer, backed by the cognitive letter and an affidavit of forgery with exhibits. We notified the state bar because sometimes sunlight is the only disinfectant you can afford. Then the credit union called to say someone had tried to change my mailing address. I spent an afternoon at the DMV waiting under fluorescent lights so I could add a designation to my license file that shouted "Verify in person." Control is a thirsty animal. You can give it a drink, but it'll want more. Marissa finally called. Her voice was thready, as if half of it were somewhere else. I didn't know about the papers, she said. I swear. How much don't you know? I asked, and I hated myself for the knife in it. A long pause. A lot, she said. Maybe everything. Are you safe? I asked. Silence again. Then, we're fine. We, I repeated, because sometimes the smallest word tells you where the fire is. She hung up before I could ask about the kids. At night I walked the line between the creek and the pasture with a flashlight, not because I believed danger took coyote form, but because moving my body keeps my mind from chewing itself raw. I found a corner stake from an old line and hammered it back flush. The sound carried through the dark. My father would have approved. He believed order could be maintained with a mallet and a ledger. 2 Mondays later, a secretary from a title office I'd never heard of left a voicemail bright as a sales pitch. Mr. Hale, just confirming the closing for Friday. Seller is your son, but we'd love your attendance. I didn't call back. I drove there. The office was painted in a color named by people who name colors, something like oat straw. The closer looked startled when I placed the TRO and the revocation on her desk, copies crisp as a slap. You're looking at an injunction, I said. Recorded in your brain, if not your system. She flipped through the pages. Her face changed through 3 shades of legal concern. We appreciate the notice, she said. We'll be reaching out to counsel. Do, I said. Reach hard. I made it to my truck before my hands went haywire. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and thought of Lena's hands on my temples when migraines knocked me down in my 30s. The skirt of her dress on my cheek. The way she said my name when she was tired. The weight of it, not as complaint, but as history. When grief arrives, it often brings a casserole of anger and memory. You have to eat it slow. I gave myself a job that afternoon. I moved compost into the new bed, turned it with the fork, watered until the ground darkened, and the smell of the earth rose like a hymn I didn't remember learning. Work is my conversion. It takes my fear and gives it sinew. At dusk, Jesse's truck eased down the drive. He leaned on the tailgate with a thermos. Want coffee? I want a time machine, I said. Closest I got is crappy caffeine. We drank and watched bats move under the bridge like commas in a sentence. He's scared, Jesse said finally. Scared men swing. I know, I said. I wish he'd learned to ask. Some men never do. Doesn't mean they can't. Just means they haven't. The moon came up stubby and orange. I felt older than my own age by a dozen hard years and younger than my fear by a mile. 2 weeks of silence is a particular kind of noise. It scrapes. I filled it with practicalities, upgraded the gate, installed motion lights, taught the dogs new tricks they resented. I made copies of copies. If paranoia is a spectrum, I moved a click to the right and called it prudent. Then the doorbell rang mid-morning. Brandon stood with his shirt sleeves rolled and a look on his face I recognized from the mirror when a bolt won't thread. He didn't come alone. 2 men I didn't know flanked him, suits with 2 shiny shoes. The front one started talking like he enjoyed nouns. Mr. Hale, I'm attorney David Leland, representing your son in a petition seeking limited guardianship for your benefit. I didn't ask them in. I stood in the doorway with the screen closed and thought, not for the first time, how a screen door is a symbol and a technology both. You filed already? I asked. It's in process, he said, handing me a thick packet with tabs. Given the exigencies, we'd like to expedite. Exigencies. I opened the packet and looked for the part where my name lived. There it was, living beside words like impaired and disoriented. My jaw clicked the way it does when I grind my teeth in sleep. You boys wait there, I said. I'm going to get my binder. Sandra had told me this day might come. She'd built a castle of paper and placed it in my hall closet. I set it on the porch table like a wedding cake. Let me show you Exhibit A, I said, and I laid out the evaluation from Del Seaton. Then the TRO, then the revocation, then the affidavit of forgery with Daryl's indexing notes, then a letter from Adult Protective Services summarizing their intake and the open investigation into attempts at financial exploitation. The table filled like a map of a war already fought. Brandon didn't look at the papers. He looked at me, eyes bright with fury and something else, terror. Why are you doing this? He said, but he didn't mean the paperwork. Because you tried to sell the ground your mother is buried in, I said. Because you decided your fear outranked my life. Leland cleared his throat to remind the scene it was a legal one. Regardless of your feelings, he said, the court has wide latitude under Texas Estates Code to... A truck door slammed. Jesse, summoned by a text I'd sent when I saw the suits coming up the drive, ran a palm along the brim of his hat. Gentlemen, he said, we having a hearing on this porch? We're attempting to ensure the safety of a vulnerable elder, Leland said. Elder, Jesse said. Sure, vulnerable. He just handed you a 12-inch stack of reasons to go home. They left without shaking hands. Brandon lingered 1 second longer, nostrils flaring like a kid hit first by the air leaving his own rage. He said, You're going to die out here alone. And for a dangerous moment I wanted to hurt him back. I didn't. I said, I'll die where I choose. When the dust settled and the road resumed its hum, I carried the binder inside and put it back on its shelf. Then, without warning, my legs forgot their job. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and breathed like someone had to teach me again. The house was so quiet I could hear the old clock in the hall clicking seconds into piles. I cried into my hands so softly the dog stayed asleep. There is a point in any fight where you know you've crossed the middle. You don't know the ending yet, but you're not at the beginning anymore. I went to the nursery and pressed my thumb into the soil of a flat of milkweed. It gave the right resistance. The monarchs would have a landing place. I whispered to the leaves like prayer. I didn't see Brandon for 2 weeks. I heard about him. A neighbor's young cousin who works reception at a boutique firm downtown said his office phone was a beehive. Someone at the co-op said they saw him in a bar at noon, talking too loud into a dead phone. The stories piled up, and I built a little fence in my head to keep them from nibbling me to death. I busied my hands. APS came back with more questions. Curtis sat at the kitchen table with his clipboard and a sympathy that didn't curdle. We're going to document everything, he said. If nothing else, it creates a record that makes future mischief harder. Paper, I said, and he nodded like we were trading passwords. Then came the call from someone I didn't know. Allison, a paralegal in Brandon's office who said she couldn't sleep. Mr. Hale, she said, I shouldn't say this, but you need to know. He's been covering holes by digging new ones, investments that don't exist. Client funds diverted. There are people outside the bar who want their money, and they don't file motions. When the call ended, I sat very still until my body remembered how to move. There's a heaviness specific to realizing the person you love has made a second home out of lying. It's different than simple disappointment. It's a recalibration of gravity. That evening, I took a ceramic dish from the cabinet, the one with the blue rim that Lena bought at a roadside market in Luckenbach, and I set it on the counter. I took out the spare key I keep for Brandon and put it in the dish. I stood there a long time, looking at that key and everything it meant. Then I put it back on the hook by the door. Not because I trusted him, but because I wanted to leave a door open that only a better man could walk through. The next day, Marissa drove up the lane, dust bowing before her tires. She stepped out with 2 kids whose faces were drawn down like the corners of old paper. Caleb lifted a hand in a gesture that was bravado designed to cover fear. Nora came straight to me and put her face in my shirt like she was 7 again. Can we talk? Marissa asked, voice thinned out by sleep she hadn't had. We sat on the porch where the light falls different in late afternoon. He's gone, she said. 3 days now. He left a note that said he was fixing it. He took the jewelry my grandmother left me. He emptied the college fund accounts. We didn't know until the bank called. Men I don't know have been outside the condo at odd hours. I brought the kids here because I didn't know where else wouldn't be found. Well, I said, and I felt Lena smile inside me the way you feel a warm spot in bathwater. You found the right place. There's a little house across the creek where a hand lived back when I ran cattle for 4 sloppy years. 2 rooms and a porch you can drag a chair into and call it a theater. It had been sleeping. We woke it. Jesse brought a spare fridge. I bought mattresses at the big store in San Marcos, the kind they roll into a box with an indecent name. Marissa scrubbed like an exorcism. The kids found the rope swing and tested how much sky a body can claim at once. That night we ate chili that tasted like promises I would actually keep, I watched my grandson ask for seconds and my granddaughter draw a cypress tree with a pencil so blunt it shouldn't have been able to find a line. When the dishes were done and the porch darkening, Marissa said, "Why are you being kind? After all of it." "Why?" "Because I am not just a person who was betrayed," I said. "I am a grandfather, and there are birds here who don't care about your mess, and I'd like you to learn their names." She put her hands to her face like a curtain and cried into them in the quiet way that tells you she's gotten good at this. You can measure time by the way a child learns a place. The first week, Caleb and Nora clung to the house like lizards that don't trust the sun. By the third, Nora had a secret path to the water she guarded like state intel, and Caleb could string a line and pull sunfish from the creek, practicing release with a reverence that made me proud. We fell into a rhythm. School bus at the gate, homework at my kitchen table because I see better than the lamp in their place. Marissa, who claimed to hate dirt, came home smelling like chalk and paperback glue, hair in a knot that meant a day had made demands and she'd met them. She'd taken a sub-job at the elementary in Wimberley, and by the end of a month had a contract. Kids told her things they didn't tell parents. She didn't flinch. The nursery shifted too. Orders came in steady. Homeowners replacing lawn with natives because water has to be made a sacrament when summers turn savage. I taught Caleb how to read a root system like a sentence. Nora drew tags for the plants with a flair that tempted me to raise prices. Brandon's name became a wind chime that rang at odd hours. Sometimes Marissa's phone lit with a scam call that felt like it might be him. Sometimes it was. Short, jittery conversations from numbers that died by morning. "I'm trying," he said once, voice frayed. "Don't bring them here," Marissa said so firmly it startled me. "Not until you're ready to act like we matter." One afternoon, a black SUV idled at the end of the drive. The man inside didn't get out, just sat with sunglasses on. Jesse pulled in behind and parked where his bumper read like a boundary marker. The SUV left. The dust they raised settled on the prickly pear like sugar. "You got a storm and a church on the same property," Jesse said. "I'm going to keep circling. Appreciate it." That night, I wrote my will again. Not because the old one was wrong, but because we are allowed to put our hands on the wheel of our legacy. I left the land in trust with clear language. No sale without 3 signatures. Mine, a disinterested trustee, and the sunrise. I added a clause that reads like poetry to me. Stewardship shall favor native growth, public good, and quiet. I signed my name and thought of my father tapping the cigar tin. The phone rang at 10:41 p.m. The hour you either get good news or a catastrophe. Brandon. "Dad," he said, and it was the voice he used when he was 6 and broke something he couldn't glue. "I'm in San Antonio. I ran out of road." "Where?" I asked. "A motel off I-10 that smells like sadness." "You ready to stop running?" "Yes," he said. "I think I forgot how." "Tomorrow morning," I said. "I'll come get you. We'll go to the courthouse. We'll tell the truth." Silence. Then, "Okay." I sat on the edge of my bed and felt the weight of what an okay can hold. San Antonio wakes early. Even the highway shoulders look caffeinated. I pulled into the motel lot just after 7, the sun still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. Brandon stood outside his door with a backpack and a beard that looked grown from neglect instead of style. His eyes were banged up, purple moons from a tide that hadn't receded. He got in the truck and didn't talk for 10 miles. When he did, it came out like confession, breathless, incomplete, tripping. "I thought I could outrun it," he said. "I kept believing that if I made the next big case, if I landed the next client, the math would flip. And every time I lost, I played again. I became a slot machine that thought it was a surgeon." "People trusted you," I said. "That matters." "I know," he said, voice so small I turned down the radio to hear it. "I'm ready to tell them I did it." We parked behind the Hays County Government Center to avoid the front steps and the theater of it all. Sandra was waiting with a folder and the patience of a woman who knows courts move like rivers, slow until they flood. We sat in a glassed-in mediocrity where justice sometimes lives. Brandon signed papers that said things a judge would recognize, stipulated facts, waivers, an intent to make victims whole. There'd be charges, disbarment, restitution that would feel like bailing an ocean with a teacup. He signed anyway. When the bailiff's hand touched his shoulder to lead him back, he looked at me. "Do you forgive me?" he asked, like he was 7 and asking permission to come back inside. "I forgive you the way I've forgiven my own foolishness," I said. "Not once. Daily." They took him through a door that locks from the wrong side. The sound it made is a sound I don't have a word for. Firm, final, not unkind. The news posted something quick and bland. Local attorney under investigation, allegations of mishandled funds, voluntary surrender. I didn't read the comments. I cut the article out and put it in a binder labeled "What Happened," because names matter and truth deserves a box. Marissa picked up the kids from school and drove them straight to the river. She didn't tell them yet. She let the son do some work first. They threw rocks, counted circles. That night she told them around my kitchen table where good and hard things are said. Nora cried the way her mother does. Caleb stared at his plate like a map to a country he didn't want to visit. I told them their father did a brave thing by stopping. It's also true he did 10 cowardly things that came before. "Is he going to jail?" Caleb asked. "Yes," I said. "And he's going to school too, the kind where you learn you aren't the center." "What if he comes back different?" Nora asked. "We'll be here," I said. "Different is the only way anyone comes back." Later, when the kids slept and the house made its settling noises, Marissa poured 2 fingers of the bourbon Lena bought for our 40th. "We're going to be poor for a while," she said, and we both laughed because we'd been poor before and it had not killed us. "We'll be busy," I said. Busy has a way of standing in for rich if you let it. Jail is a blunt teacher. Brandon got lucky in small ways that added up to a mercy, county time, a sentence that made space for work release after a while, a judge who believed in restitution more than spectacle. The bar did what it had to do. The disbarment letter arrived on thick paper that could have been a diploma in another life. I visited every Thursday with a paper sack of approved items and a list of things I wasn't allowed to say. We learned to talk in short sentences that didn't need backstory. He told me about a man named Darnell who taught him to play chess without talking. I told him about the seed flats, the way the milkweed took this year like it understood it was needed. We practiced forgiveness like a muscle you don't want to atrophy. Brandon signed up for every class they offered. He took financial literacy, which felt like a hell of a punchline, and horticulture through a community program that sends master gardeners inside. He mailed me photocopies of certificates with stamps crooked enough to be charming. "I like dirt," he wrote once. "Did you know that about me?" I wrote back. I suspected. On the outside, life narrowed and deepened. The nursery shifted from sideline to engine. We expanded the shade house, invested in a battered box truck that smelled like fertilizer and patience. Caleb worked weekends measuring soil moisture and cracking jokes that told me his humor had made the trip intact. Nora started painting plant tags that folks asked to keep after planting. Marissa graded papers on the porch and learned to spot a lie on sight. The debts were a mountain. We started climbing. Every invoice paid, we skimmed off a percentage into a fund we called Sorry in the Ledger, though on the checks we wrote restitution because clarity is its own apology. Sandra helped wrangle the civil side, and sometimes I watched her work and thought, this is what justice looks like when it takes off its robe and gets sweaty. When Brandon transitioned to work release, we built a small house across the creek. 2 rooms, a shelf for paperbacks, a front stoop just big enough for a chair and a dog. He and I hammered together in a silence that wasn't hostile, just careful. He sanded the door until the grain showed a map of a river basin. He touched it like a relic. On move-in day, he stood inside with a duffel and a look in his eyes that reminded me of him at 5, when he'd slept in a blanket fort and woke up to the magic of having made something that held. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "You need to show me." He did. He showed up at 6:30 a.m. with coffee he made too strong. He learned the names of 10 grasses and then 20. He taught me spreadsheets without making me feel like a relic. We argued about labels and won both ways. Mine got a story on the back. His got QR codes. Folks started driving from San Antonio for the Hail Native wayfinding cards Nora designed. A college kid with a YouTube channel made a video about us called, "Your Grandpa's Nursery is the Future," and business got weird for a month. We survived. At night, when the porch went blue with the end of the day and the children's voices drifted like birds you can't quite see, I let myself believe a little in goodness that doesn't erase damage but grows right up through it, like prairie grass after a burn. I told Lena about it, standing by the cypress we planted the year we paid off the mortgage. I said, "You'd like the way he carries a bag of compost now. You'd tease him about his soft hands going hard." I turned 82 in June. The creek was low enough you could cross without a squeak. Someone brought a store cake and someone else brought a pecan pie, and the pie won by a mile. We ate on the long table I built from reclaimed boards years ago. Its surface a palimpsest of meals and arguments and spilled soil. There are mornings now when I wake before the dogs and watch the cypress shadow crawl across the water. I feel the years in my hands and not much in my head. Memory holding true except for the place I put the good pruning shears. I've started to narrate my days into a little recorder Marissa bought because she says stories are part of the inventory. "You keep a ledger of what we owe and what we learned," she told me, smiling like Lena would if she'd learned to be wry at 48. Brandon has been out a year. He still attends meetings that look like nothing from the street but save lives inside. He still writes checks with the word restitution that sometimes make his hand shake before the pen moves. He still loses his temper once in a while and then circles back like a man who learned apologies late but learned them well. He built a trellis for climbing beans and measured it too carefully, then laughed at himself when the beans ignored his math. Caleb talks about Texas A&M and soil science like a kid who has decided on a devout life. Nora wants to study biological illustration. The way she draws a leaf vein could stop a clock. Marissa hums church songs when she thinks no one is listening. Jesse had a grandson and brings him by to look at the tadpoles like they're constellations at ground level. Even Curtis from APS came to buy milkweed, and we pretended we didn't know each other from the worst day of my pride. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not selling when the number might have been big, when the land was trying out being an asset instead of a home. I tell them money is a very good servant and a very bad father. I tell them my boy tried to make money his priest, and it took him to a church that doesn't forgive. I tell them forgiveness is a daily practice, like watering, like weeding. You can't do it once a year and expect it to hold. At dusk, when the light slants and the bats start their grammar lesson under the bridge, I sit on the porch and talk to Lena like a man who knows he's closer to seeing her than he is to the day she left. I tell her the beans this year came up slow and then exploded. I tell her about Nora's drawing of a cypress knee that made me cry at the sink, a bunched rag in my hand and no good reason for tears except the obvious one. I tell her Brandon, our boy, full of charm and menace and hunger, and now something else, something like humility, stood in the nursery and taught a customer how to plant a live oak so the flare sits proud and the roots don't choke. He did it right. He did it like a person who knows what he owes and who he loves. The other night he sat beside me and we didn't fill the quiet. After a while he said, "Dad, I think I had to lose everything to see it." He didn't look at me when he said it. He watched the bats. "I wish you hadn't," I said, "but I'm glad you did." He laughed a little, that laugh I loved before it turned into a weapon and now back again into something harmless. "I used to think you were stubborn," he said. "I am," I said. "Thank God," he said. "I don't have a moral for you stronger than this. Keep your papers, know your neighbors, plant things that outlive you, and forgive daily, or you'll go sour. If someone tries to steal your life, meet them at the door with a binder and a prayer and a deputy's phone number in your pocket. And if that someone is your own blood, build a small house across the creek for the person they could be when they're done being who they were. When I go, I hope it's in June with the river low and the cypress making stippled shade. I hope the kids are in the yard messing with something that will break into laughter. I hope the ledger is neat and the last entry says, owed, mercy, paid, in kind.